Okay, students, for this Dewey-ing history debate, we're going to be talking about veterans' policies. We're going to start with this question-focused document. We all know what a veteran is. A veteran would be somebody who served in the military. In 1931, the National Veterans Association of Enlisted Men magazine from Seattle, Washington, published this cartoon titled The Changing Years. Above the cartoon, they wrote, "Give them their bonus and employment." You'll find out what that means later, but let's just focus on this cartoon. So in the left-hand panel, somewhere in France, 1918, we have a couple men, a couple soldiers in the trenches. One says, "Want some chow before you go over?" On the right-hand side, everywhere in the U.S., 1931. We seem to have those same soldiers, but now they're in a city, maybe in a gutter. They're saying, "This is like the trenches, ain't it, Bill? But do you remember the chow we got in the trenches?" What has happened to these soldiers, these American soldiers? They were sent to France in 1918. What has happened to them by the 1930s? Try and find out how this situation, the current state of soldiers, former soldiers, of veterans in the United States in the 1930s, is similar to something we might see happening today. After you've tried to make that connection, create a question about this cartoon. For our contemporary policy debate, we're going to learn about something called an other than honorable discharge. You're going to open this article. You can read it or listen to it. Tell you that the text is different than the audio, so one or the other. What you're trying to find out is what is an other than honorable discharge, OTHD for short. You need to tell me what are the consequences for a vet who gets an OTHD. What does having an OTHD prevent them from qualifying for? Explain to me why what the VA has done to try and solve that problem. What's their program going to do? You're going to look for why people support the VA treating soldiers with an other than honorable discharge, and why people oppose an other than honorable discharge. Then, as always, you're going to give me your opinion. So in this case, do you support or oppose the VA, the Veterans Administration, a government office, treating soldiers, giving care to soldiers, giving therapy to soldiers with an other than honorable discharge? Now it's time to go back in the past, and we're going to study House Resolution 7726, a bill to provide for the immediate payment to veterans of the face value of their adjusted service certificates. We're being driven by a compelling policy question of what is our country's responsibility to our military veterans? And go to our webpage. House Resolution 7726, a bill to provide for the immediate payment to veterans of the face value of their adjusted service certificates. You find exactly what this is and what it would do. Be enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, the Title V of the World War Adjusted Compensation Act is amended by adding at the end thereof 3 new sections to read as follows. So we need to look at our asterisk here and find out what the Adjusted Compensation Act is. It was a piece of legislation from 1926. It promised World War I veterans a bonus based on the length of service between April 5th, 1917 and July 1st, 1919. Soldiers would be paid an extra $1 for every day they were stationed stateside, meaning in the United States, and $1.25 for every day overseas. if you had been only stationed in the States and never got shipped abroad, the most you could get was $500. If you did travel overseas, the most you could get was $625. So this legislation was going to give an extra cash payment to World War I veterans based on how long they served and where they served. It would be given to them in the form of a bond, though, not just cash payment. So in 1926, they were given a bond, a piece of paper, and that money was being held by the US government. Because of the interest on that money, it would grow to be worth $1,000 by 1945. So what you need to know is basically in 1926, the government promised to pay World War I soldiers $1,000 20 years later. The change, this amendment, say this. Section 509. The Administrator of Veterans Affairs is authorized and directed to pay to any veteran to whom an adjusted service certificate has been issued the amount of the face value of the certificate. So, this bill is going to provide for the immediate payment of those certificates. So, rather than wait until 1945, this bill is going to mean soldiers can collect their money immediately. So the effect of this, what it would do, is it would give World War I veterans cash. You need to find out what was going on that would lead to a debate over whether or not the United States should give World War I veterans a cash bonus. Back in 1919, approximately 4.7 million veterans had participated in World War I. About half went overseas for an average of 5.5 months. Of the 1.1 million who actually saw combat, 116,000 died in service, and 204,000 were wounded or otherwise disabled. After the war, veterans were simply mustered out of service from their bases in the United States and received a $60 bonus. So after peace was made and they came back home, they were just dismissed from service and they got $60 for it. 5 years later, in 1924, President Calvin Coolidge vetoed a bill granting bonuses to veterans of World War I, saying patriotism bought and paid for is not patriotism. Congress overrode his veto a few days later, and they passed the World War Adjustment Compensation Act. That's the one that we learned about above. In 1929, in January, Wright Patton, congressman from Texas, introduced a veterans bill that would release the World War I bonuses early. The bill did not make it out of committee. You could imagine that in 1924, World War I soldiers are happy about the idea that they're getting a bonus. Do you think very many were happy about the idea of waiting 20 years in order to get that money? So 5 years after that, politicians start debating, should we give them that money now? This becomes especially important when October of 1929, the stock market crashes and the United States goes deeper into the Great Depression. Lots of people lost their jobs. Unemployment was 33% in the 1930s. You could understand why those veterans who now have lost their jobs really want to get some of that cash. In 1931, in January, Patman reintroduced his bill to Congress. While it made it through Congress, President Hoover vetoed the bill, denouncing the bonus as a dole and a step toward government aid to those who can help themselves. President Hoover didn't think he needed to give cash to the soldiers because those soldiers were able-bodied and can help themselves. Soldiers start to get upset about this, the veterans do. In 1932, in May, a former cannery worker named Walter W. Walters led to Washington a band of jobless World War I veterans who had been greatly impoverished during the Great Depression. Calling themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, they demanded early payment of the bonus Congress had promised them in 1924. They came from all over the country to Washington. Walters organized the various encampments along military lines and announced there would be no panhandling, no drinking, no radicalism. The marchers were simply going to stay until the Veterans Bill is passed. They occupied parks and a row of condemned buildings along Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the Capitol. When new arrivals overflowed that site, they erected a shanty town on the floodplain of the Anacostia River southeast of Capitol Hill. By the end of June, the movement had swelled to more than 20,000 tired, hungry, and frustrated men. In June, Congressman Patman again introduced his bill. This is a picture of the encampment. So not only were there thousands of U.S. veterans, all of these men who served in World War I, but many of them also brought their families with them. They all hoped to come to Washington to convince Congress to pay out their money early. So what's really important that we understand for this debate is that World War I soldiers had fought in the war, defended America. It was approved to give them a bonus, but that bonus wasn't till long down the road. During the Great Depression, soldiers were unemployed and unhappy, and they felt that they needed some help in the form of early payment of their bonus. So now we need to find out why people believe our country does have a unique responsibility towards our veterans. We're going to read a letter that was written by World War I veteran Jack Rast to Representative Patman. While we read this, we're trying to find out why people believe the government owes something special to these soldiers. He wrote, "I have 5 little children and a wife who are insufficiently fed and are at this present moment hungry. I have stood in water, mud, and filth up to my waist fighting for my flag. Until now, broken in health, out of work, I am obliged to accept charity. Today, they left me a bunch of spinach and a small, very small piece of meat to feed 8 people. What has he done for this country? Fighting for my flag. What does that mean? My God, gentlemen, do you think I have no pride? Let me tell you, representatives of the American people, I am as good an American citizen as any of you. I want work, not charity, and the people must have it. If the government will pay us what they owe us, it will put just that much money into circulation, for there is no doubt that almost all of the World War men need money as badly as I do. If the government will pay us what they owe us." It's interesting language he uses, what they owe us. Does he mean the money that they approved, or is he talking about a different kind of debt? That what they owe us for fighting the war, or what they owe us from the legislation of the bonus bill? There are thousands of ex-soldiers in actual want right now. I know I am, for as God is my judge, there is not a single penny under this roof at this writing, and none in sight. Thousands of ex-soldiers in actual want right now. They were soldiers for our country, and what do they need? I want you to know I thank you personally for what you have done for the soldiers. Would to God there were more men in Washington like you, men who know what the government owes us and what is our due. Again, this idea of government owing us. Mr. Patman, I thank you, so do my babies and my dear wife, and we all say God bless you. Sincerely yours, Jack Rast. Well, after you have highlighted what you consider to be an important quote, you need to tell me what that quote means. What is the main idea that you took from what this veteran said to the representative? Why was Mr. Rast telling Mr. Patman that these soldiers need something from the government? All right, after we've done that, we're going to look at the visual. Oh, sorry, but first you need to tell me why that evidence, the past debate, matters for today's debate over policies impacting veterans. So, what's happening today related to the other than honorable disservice? How do we feel about those veterans? And what do some people still think about what we owe to those veterans and what those veterans need right now? We're going to look at this cartoon from 1931, the Veterans Service Magazine. So, this is a magazine that was for veterans then and now. 1918, what were these soldiers doing? What were they facing? And who were they facing it for? Now in 1931, what's that veteran asking for? Congress is debating a bill for cash payment, soldiers' bonuses, and the veteran down here is asking, I ask no charity, I ask for justice. What did this soldier do for his country? And now, what does he want? What does he think will give him justice for what he did for the country, for what he risked? After you've summarized the main idea of the image, tell me why that matters for today's debate over helping soldiers, veterans today, who have been discharged other than honorable discharge. In section 2, we're trying to find out why some people believe our country's responsibility towards our veterans has limits. It's not that they're saying that we have no responsibilities to the veterans, but why do they think there are limits on it? First document, we're going to hear a testimony from a World War I veteran named Richard ONeill. He gave this testimony to the House of Representatives Committee on Ways and Means hearing when they were learning about the bonus bill. This man, Mr. ONeill, was a Medal of Honor winner for his actions in World War I. Let's see why he thinks there's limits on what is owed to the soldiers. I wish to go on record at this time to state that there are no living heroes except those veterans who are lying on their backs in hospitals today. The real heroes are the boys lying under the white crosses. Where's he talking about over there? Over in Europe? So he says the real heroes are the ones who have died in the war. He said, if cash payment in full of the certificates is authorized now, every man holding one will demand and receive it. Thus, at a time when the country can ill afford paying nearly $1,600,000,000 to men not certainly in real need of it. So why should we pay $1.6 billion to men who don't need it? Remember, during the Great Depression, so government's already hard on cash. With unemployment and general depression prevalent in the country today, the communists are using the bonus issue as an excuse to strike at the very foundations of American liberty. Real veterans do not desire to live on their government and are willing to take honest employment any time in preference to gratuities, so they don't want handouts. They don't want to live on the government. Real veterans are men with pride and character. They have earned for themselves the right to participate in the general scheme of American life. How do they want to be treated? Do they want to be treated differently? If you have pride, that's probably not the case. My earnest plea to them is that they let the question of cash payment of bonus die now and combine themselves into an effective organization with a purpose and aim to take that part in the upbuilding of their country, which it is their right and duty to take. What kinds of ideas did we get from this Medal of Honor winner as to why the soldiers should not be getting any kind of special treatment? Who does he think deserves to be honored? Is it those who survived or those who died? Why should we not be spending this much money? Consider those things. And think about his last statements right here about real veterans. A real veteran does not desire to live on their government. Think about these, pick one that you think is most important, and summarize it for me. After you've summarized it, you're going to need to explain why that idea from the past matters in today's debate over the VA and whether or not veterans who were discharged dishonorably should still be getting treatment from the VA. And our last piece of historic evidence, in the Evening Ledger newspaper ran a cartoon by Charles Bill Sykes in 1932 titled "Well Done." In this cartoon, we have President Hoover here standing in front of the U.S. Treasury. We know that the U.S. Treasury is where our government keeps all of our money. What is Hoover apparently doing? He seems to be defending the Treasury. In his hand, he's holding a rolled up paper that says "Bonus Stand." And it looks like he just swatted somebody away. Based on this footwear, the person that got swatted away was a soldier. On that soldier's pant leg, it says "political expediency." Political expediency means to do something because it's politically convenient instead of doing what is morally right. So at the time, Herbert Hoover, as president, is faced with this large number of American soldiers who are upset and are demanding early payment of their bonds. The convenient thing to do for a politician would be just to hand out the money and make those vets happy, right? But what is Hoover trying to defend? If we start handing out money, might it have consequences for the rest of the country? So Sykes says "well done" to Hoover for turning down the request of these vets because he's defending the finances of the United States. Is that a reason to have limitations on how much we try to do for veterans? Because whatever we do for veterans comes out of the pockets of the American taxpayer? Do you think that's why some people believe there's limits on how we treat veterans? Okay, put yourself in the shoes of the American policymakers at that time. You have thousands of American veterans who served in the military in World War I, who risked their lives camping out in Washington, D.C., demanding that they get early payment. But this is during the Great Depression, and the government is short on money, and veterans are not the only ones who are homeless and broke. On June 15th, 1932, the House passed the bill. 2 days later, the Senate rejected the bill, so it did not become law. So we have all of these veterans waiting in DC, and they're just told that they're not going to be getting that money. Why do you think the government decided to make that choice? Because of the cost? Did the government have the money to hand out? Apparently, some legislature didn't think so. So now it's important that we talk about what the results of this were for all those veterans who had came to DC. Army Chief of Staff Douglas MacArthur was convinced that the march was a communist conspiracy to undermine the United States government. On July 21st, President Hoover ordered the evacuation of several buildings on Pennsylvania Avenue and authorized the use of force if necessary. On July 28th, U.S. Attorney General William D. Mitchell ordered the veterans removed from all government property. Some marchers resisted the Washington, D.C. police who came to remove them. They rushed them and they threw bricks. The Washington police shot at the protesters, and 2 veterans were wounded and later died. President Hoover ordered the Secretary of War to surround the affected area and clear it without delay. This image is a picture of the police fighting with the veterans. Led by MacArthur, 600 Army troops began pushing the veterans out, destroying their makeshift camps as they went. Although no weapons were fired, cavalry advanced with swords drawn, and some blood was shed. By nightfall, hundreds had been injured by gas, including one of the soldiers' babies who died. Bricks, clubs, bayonets, and sabers. Secretary of War Hurley sent 2 orders to MacArthur indicating that the president did not wish the army to pursue the bonus marchers across the bridge into their main camp, but MacArthur sent his men across the bridge anyway. The day's toll was 3 dead, 54 injured, 135 arrests. I suggest you watch this video reel to see images of the United States military pursuing U.S. Army veterans on cavalry, with soldiers, and with tanks. It's a pretty sad spectacle to have seen those veterans who served their country and who are now living in poverty being chased by their government, all for requesting financial assistance. Skip to 1933. So President Hoover lost his re-election to Franklin Delano Roosevelt because of his handling of the Great Depression. And one of the things that made him look worse was the fact that he ordered the military to drive these veterans out of DC. In 1933, 1,000 veterans marched to Washington to demand bonuses. FDR opposed the bonus, and he decided the solution was to issue an executive order permitting enrollment of 25,000 veterans into the CCC. So the Conservation Corps was one of the New Deal programs we'll learn about later in class. So rather than give the soldiers cash, he gave the soldiers jobs. 2 years later, in 1935, Congress passed the Patman-Greenback bonus bill, which Roosevelt vetoed. Roosevelt argued that the program was not a relief bill and it would invite demands for similar treatment by other groups. With respect to the veterans, he said, "I hold that able-bodied citizens should be accorded no treatment different from that accorded to other citizens who did not wear a uniform during the World War. The veteran who is disabled owes his condition to the war. The healthy veteran who is unemployed owes his troubles to the Depression." So Roosevelt, thinking that lots of people needed help, didn't think it was fair to give that help to some and not to others. And lastly, in 1936, Congress sent another version of the Patman Bill to the President on January 22nd. The bill became law when the Senate overrode the President's veto on January 27th. The act replaced the service certificate awards to veterans under the 1924 Act and issued Treasury Department bonds in denominations of $50 which paid interest at an annual rate of 3% for the next 9 years, higher than rates available in savings accounts. Amounts less than $50 were paid immediately. The bonds could not be sold, but the Treasury would redeem them for cash at any time after June 15, 1936. Most veterans redeemed their bonds properly. So, what do we know had happened? The soldiers came to D.C., asked for the money. They were driven by police, fought against the police, were then driven out by the military. They're forced out of Washington, and a few years later, under a different administration, they get their money earlier, but they did have to go through quite a bit to get it. Rather than having to wait till 1945, they were given money in 1936. All right, let's do a compare and contrast. What is similar between the two policy debates? In both cases, we're talking about providing help to what group of people? In the past, what group of veterans were we helping? Veterans from World War I? And those veterans were asking for what from the government? Today, we're not talking about a specific group of veterans in the sense of what combat they fought in, but we're talking about veterans that had been discharged dishonorably. So the question here is not giving them cash. What is it that people want the VA to give those other than honorable discharge soldiers? It's treatment, right? People argue that those soldiers deserve to get treated by the VA despite their other than honorable discharge. Right, after comparing and contrasting these, you need to decide on the past evidence whether or not we should have the VA treating soldiers with other than honorable discharge. Think back to our arguments made above. Do we owe soldiers something because they're veterans? Or are there limitations to what we owe our veterans? Consider both of those ideas and decide whether or not we should support or oppose treating soldiers by the VA even if they have an other than honorable discharge. Let me know if you have questions. Good luck.